Hi, welcome to Miss Richardson's U.S. History 5-Minute Lectures. This information will be U.S. Notes 4.13, JFK Becomes President. It includes information that goes with section number 3 on your Unit 4 study guide. Remember, you have control over this lecture, so pause whenever you need to, write down any information you need using your study guide to help you figure out what's important, and write down any questions you have. I'll see you in class with any questions. Let's go ahead and get started with these. So previously, we looked at Cold War actions and events throughout the 1950s under President Eisenhower. Now we want to begin to look at how those actions changed in the 60s under President Kennedy. In 1960, JFK was elected president, John F. Kennedy, with Lyndon B. Johnson serving as his vice president. As president, JFK was faced with several international Cold War challenges. However, Kennedy felt that massive retaliation and brinkmanship limited the U.S. response. He wanted what he called a more flexible response, one where the response could be specific to the threat. So if war was needed, we could do war. If it wasn't, we could use other actions. So the idea that Kennedy's foreign policy decisions and actions are going to be based on is known as flexible response. This means that the buildup of troops and more conventional weapons are needed, as well as continuing to amass nuclear weapons. So we're not always threatening nuclear war. So Kennedy's actions continued and expanded the arms race, because now we have to build up all parts of our military. In addition, Kennedy expanded the space race with the Soviet Union. So you should remember that the space race began in 1957 with the launch of Sputnik by the Soviet Union, and that caused the U.S. to create NASA. Then the Soviets actually put the first man in space in 1961, which is right when Kennedy was taking office. So the country was concerned, as was President Kennedy at that point. If the Soviets won in the space race, the people might think communism was better than capitalism. So America had to react, and we had to do it quickly. We had to do something. So JFK called for the U.S. to put a man on the moon. That launched the Apollo program, that is part of NASA, a NASA program, and eventually in 1969, they were successful at landing the first man on the moon, which means we did it before the Soviets. So the U.S. was now winning the space race thanks to the Apollo program and Kennedy's support of it in the early 1960s. In addition to the space race and the arms race, Kennedy also began some peaceful actions to stop communism. These fit under his flexible response plan, responding to the situation as appropriate. He believed that if the U.S. could demonstrate how wonderful capitalism and the U.S. were, other countries would want to support us and be like us. So programs were created by Kennedy to promote the U.S. and capitalism without military involvement, and those included things like the Alliance for Progress and the Peace Corps. The Alliance for Progress aided Latin American countries in education, housing, and healthcare. Volunteers worked in Latin America, helping in areas of need. This program saw mixed results because some countries accepted the U.S. philosophies and others were still drawn towards communism and often corruption, corrupt governments, corrupt leaders who would kind of take the aid the U.S. was giving and use it for their own means. So Alliance for Progress was mixed success. However, the Peace Corps was more successful, and it even still exists today. Volunteers would spend 2 years helping in needy areas, building roads, sewage systems, schools, teaching English, all kinds of things. That promotes goodwill and collaborative feelings between the other countries in the U.S. It creates a connection between the two. So that was very successful. So Kennedy changed the U.S. policies from massive retaliation and brinkmanship to flexible response and goodwill actions. So his actions are going to be based on those ideas. That doesn't mean he didn't use military actions. He simply tried other actions as well. So he saw as different choices. We'll look at some of his military actions in our next set of notes. This is the end of U.S. Notes 4.13. Hopefully you learned something. Make sure you bring those questions to class.